Good morning, everybody. My name is Andre. I'm the Director of Data Systems for CCSA. I'm a guy that has a mentality of let's fight for kids, period, every day. So a little story here. None of these folks are from California. Romy Drucker is the CEO of 74 Million. Some of you might read that. Darrell Bradford is Executive Vice President at 50 Can. Pete Cook, former TFA staffer and core member. Ed policy writers and a lot of consulting for groups like TNTP. And Chris Stewart, you might know him as Citizen Stewart. He's at Ed Post and does about a million other things. As a quick preface, folks who know me know that I'm up at 4:30 every morning. And Darrell and I like to have these kind of things that I call drive-by text conversations.
It's not 4:30 for me.
Yeah, he's on the East Coast. So we have these drive-by conversations talking about the latest thing that sends us through the roof and how kids are being treated and not being treated well. So when we were setting up for conference or starting to come together with all of our panels, I decided, you know what, I'm a bit of a fighter. These three chuckleheads on the end are all fighters. Romy's the normal one around here. So I decided to mercilessly hassle them and get them out here to talk about the fight that we're all in. A story that I always like to tell is my mom's godfather. His dad died when he was very young. And in today's climate, he might have been somebody that would not have been a kind of person that should go to college. 1952, he won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. 1962, he won the Nobel Prize for Peace. So in our conversations, a lot of the stuff that Darrell and I talk about, I think about Dr. Pauling, because as Darrell likes to point out, and as all these folks believe, in every one of our schools are kids who have the potential to get a Nobel Prize and change the world. And the less and less that we recognize that and not push forward to give kids the best education possible, we're killing kids' dreams, and we're making it difficult for our society to get better, discover medical benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to turn it over to Romy. She's going to keep these guys in line. And
I'm going to try.
She's going to try. It's going to be a bit of a free form. If you guys have questions, raise your hand, hassle them, push them. Enjoy the conversation, folks.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction, Andre. So this panel has been billed as Countering Misleading Narratives, which is a timely topic. And I thought we would start today, before we talk about how we counter and push back and fact check, talking a little bit about what the misleading narrative actually is, what the genesis of the campaign against public charter schools is. Somebody said to me this morning, this is a quote, "There's a dazzling array of forces aligned against public charters." So I'm gonna call on Chris first to talk a little bit about where did this all get started, who's pushing it, and what is the narrative against public charters?
So I think, and Pete can talk to this a little bit too, there is a network, it's a vast network of people that have come to be aligned around pushing a narrative about charter schools that's meant to make the public believe that they are kind of just real strict, stringent testing mills where the kids' humanity is not honored. There's no special needs kids. They're selective. They're forces for privatization. They're actually just tools of the oligarchy to beat up on communities and take away their democratically controlled schools. That's as tight as I can make the narrative, right? Actually, I think I'm at the wrong convention. Wow. I think I should work for the other side. So if I think about where I think it comes from, I think it comes from the fact that there are a lot of people that have a vested interest in the traditional system. So you have public workers, and you have the associations that represent them, and they have a vested interest in not having anything break up, not having these weird little kind of atomistic schools that come into communities and start taking away. Let's not use the word customers, but take away people that they need for head count. So it's actually, I think that's where the fight gets real. I think the narrative is a problem because it's effective. I said this a couple days ago, just in that many of our communities are catching hell, right? Especially poor communities and marginalized communities. So it's not really hard to make them think that there's one more group of people trying to give them hell, right? There's a lot of forces that are actually coming into communities and creating suspicion and doubt. So you already have a leg up if you come in and you want to say somebody's coming to take something from you, because that's already a sense that's there. You can aggravate that a little bit, and it's very successful then against charter schools.
Could you break it down for us a little more, Pete? We talked about a couple of groups of people. I mean, academics and ideologues, the media, forces inside of the districts. From the work that you do, like, who's pushing this hardest?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, first and foremost, there's the teachers' unions who, obviously see charter schools as a threat, and they have a lot of money to spend, and they spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year, year after year, funding a vast constellation of organizations from, these, community organizations that pop up out of nowhere that are all of a sudden opposing charter schools, that are protesting. If you kind of dig in the data, if you look at tax forms, if you look at AFT and NEA's annual reports, you'll see that a lot of these groups are funded by the unions or their allies. But a lot of them, and most of them, are funded by the unions. If you look at the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, which is not actually an organization, it's a media campaign that's being launched by this group called Snyder Pickerel out of Chicago. They had their day of action a couple months ago. I know they did things in Los Angeles and across California and across the country. There is no organization called the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools. It's a media campaign. It's backed by a bunch of organizations that almost, completely, to a large extent, are funded by the unions. And so they have created this network and created the appearance that they have vast support. And in many cases, it's simply not the case. And in many cases, the people that are coming forward claiming that they are parts of the members of the community who are frustrated with, whatever evil deeds the charter schools are doing. These are people who are being paid to make those statements.
So I don't know what I can add, but I do want to say this. What I find most interesting about the fact that we organize these huge campaigns around charter schools, which at least in my neck of the woods, which would be the Northeast, are primarily in cities and overwhelmingly serving low-income kids, is that when wealthy people, white people, people with power decide they want to move someplace, blow up the housing market, pick a school for free-range chicken and children, nobody says anything. The moment it's about low-income Black and Hispanic people acting with the same agency that white people act with, everybody's like, no, we can do this. We gotta hold this in. So what I find most fascinating is that these organizations that call themselves like the liberators of the common man, the teachers unions in particular, they're your ally, they got your back, that they're the whole thing. They would never attack the majority of their members. As I'm sure you all know, the teaching force in America is like 80+% white and overwhelmingly female. They would never treat their members, and they would never treat anybody who was having these issues about school that wasn't in one of these places where charter schools are, the way that they treat the parents and kids who are finally engaging with choice and selecting education in a way that is not controlled by price and that is not controlled by zip code. So I just we can talk about coalitions and stuff and who could be in and who could not be in, but I just always like to highlight that if this wasn't about Black and Hispanic people actually breaking the shackles of how you get conscripted into terrible schools, we wouldn't be having this conversation because no one would mount the offense in the fashion that they've mounted it.
So I just wanted to build a little bit too on Pete's point. which was that this is a logical network too. We think that some of these things are happening randomly in different cities, but if we had a big map on this wall behind us, we could draw you a map, and all roads lead upward to just a handful of entities that have very strong ideologies and a lot of money. So whereas the reform side of the fence is always talked about as being this network of kind of like acolytes for billionaires who are just like drones and, you know, little robots for the rich. It's actually stunningly similar to that on the other side. So sometimes people accuse you of the thing that they actually are, right? So Pete could actually draw you the map. And I want to give you one example of how that happens, what that looks like, right? So, and
After the
actually,
panel.
it's a very powerful map to look at, because then you start seeing ahas. There is an intelligent design to the other side. It is not random at all. It's very well organized. There were 1,500 community-based organizations that were brought to Philadelphia to have a planning convention, and out of that came the Movement for Black Lives platform that came out of it. You have to ask yourself how you get 1,500 people to a city, 1,500 plane tickets, 1,500 hotel rooms, 1,500. The idea that this is just some grassroots revolution, vive la resistance, you know, it's shame on us as educated people if we actually believe that, because Pete can and probably will. It sounds like I saw some head shaking. At some point, draw you the map for this, you know.
So what are we supposed to do about it? Are we having the right conversation by trying to counter negative narratives about charter schools, or is that just a short-termist way of thinking about this? I mean,
So I think one of you guys should answer this question, but I want to talk about like not how you should do it, but the posture that's necessary to do it, which I think is really important. So you cannot, no one who has power in the history of history has ever given it away willingly, right? When I go outside, I'm just like, hey, anybody got some power? You want to give it to me? Like, that's not going to happen, right? Because, and particularly if you're dealing with folks who are normally underserved, the act of devolving that power requires advocacy. And advocacy is force, right? Advocacy is the product of will asserted on the public, on our institutions and on the public square. So it's a physical thing, right? It requires sort of like an offensive posture. I say all that to say that like, if you don't understand that you are in the work of devolving power from an institution or a set of institutions that have spent like 150, 200 years accreting it in like really methodical ways that basically like let them control the game in a way that is predisposed toward their goals, not our goals, you will lose, right? So I just think that even before you get to what you want to say, you have to understand like the physics that underlie why you have to say it, and that the act of getting it, like getting what you want, is one that requires some consternation.
My take is that we need to fight back. We have, far too many of us have just, put our heads down and hoped that the incessant attacks upon charter schools and other reforms would just go away. And they haven't. They've actually gotten stronger, and as Chris noted, more organized. We all wrote an essay for the 74 to kind of coincide with this panel. And in mine, I talk about how last week, the Schott Foundation brought anti-charter activists from across the country to New York City for a 2-day conference, in which essentially they hone their skills on their communication skills, and they hone their skills and their talking points on what they're going to respond to when charter advocates say things like, the money should follow the child. Their answer, I guess, of the you shouldn't put a price tag on children. And so, they have a series of talking points. These people are from all across the country: Chicago, New Orleans, Boston, Los Angeles. They are gathering these people together. They're giving them the instruments they need to attack you and attack your colleagues in other states. And this kind of, I feel like reformers have had this kind of idea that, the proof or the data that we're making a difference in the lives of kids is going to speak for itself, and it is not going to speak for itself. Another one of the facts that they noted at this conference, and this is all, it's all on Twitter, and I know somebody just tweeted the entire conference, is that emotions always win over facts. And we need to start not only hitting back against them, but hitting back against them with the stories of our families and our kids whose lives that you all are out there changing every day. And if we don't do that, we are going to see more and more setbacks. We're going to see more defeats, like we saw in Massachusetts with the charter school cap fight. And they hammered us in Massachusetts, and that's why we lost. When they did a poll in the May before the election, and it was about 50-50 split, for and against. By the time election day rolled around, I think the pro lifting the cap side got 36%. So they were able to scare people into following their side. And if we don't fight back, it's going to hurt us.
Can I ask you guys? I walked in a couple minutes late, so I don't know if we're taking questions from the audience, but we are now. Okay, got it. Sorry, thanks. Can I ask you guys, what does fight back look like to you? Does it so we talk a lot about whether it's with emotion or with facts, telling the stories of the successes that our schools are having and that sort of thing. But I also, and maybe we need to be doing a better job of that. But I also wonder how much, like the other side is on offense, and their messaging is coming to get it. I wonder how much offense we should also be thinking about in response.
I love this question. It's almost like we're like this right now. So when we say fight back, I actually changed the word just a little bit. I think we should fight forward. I think when you are
Fight forward?
we should fight forward. We have been on our heels for so long, and that is in boxing terms, that's actually just like where you don't want to be all the time. So I actually believe that we need to change our posture about what we believe about ourselves. We've been taking so much incoming that we have become very deferential. And no, we're not that bad with suspension. And no, we really do want all kids. And it's a posture of an abused person, right? We need to change that. And I do believe that real stories, emotions win, but I think what the other team does better than what we do is they know their base. They start with their base. They're not trying to convince anyone else first. They start with the people that they know are their base. We have 700, let's take just black folks, for instance, 700,000 black children in charter schools. That means we have at least that number or double of parents who have a vested interest in charter schools. And then we have educators and school leaders and advocates and other people. That is an invisible, silent group of people when we talk about charter schools. That is our base, right? So we shouldn't be trying to convince anybody of anything. Our aim in the fight and convincing, and that's how you fight forward, because it's hard to look at a woman who's got multiple kids in your school who is telling you, I need this for my life and I have a valid reason for being here, and tell her that she's just a tool of privatizers, right? That's a little bit more difficult than saying it to this guy. Like,
And only that guy.
and only that guy. And I say that just in that we really have to change our attitude about what we're doing this for, why we're doing this. We are doing something that parents want. Poll after poll tells us that. We are doing something that they're already invested in and that they need, and they have valid reasons for doing it. I think the valid reasons that we never talk about is that the systems around them are so bad. And they know it. There is a reason why we have this silent group of people that just kind of step away from the system. I think we've bought into research around the movable middle, where we feel like we can't talk about the ugly things about the school districts. And I think we need to go on the offense in that way. I really do think too.
I just want to make one point about this other really good one. So I too think we have to stop defending ourselves on the things that we are supposed to be like the districts on, and really holding up the things that make us us, right? So the fact that your charter school network is the right fit for a bunch of kids, but not the right fit for every kid, is a good thing, not a bad thing, right? The fact that you have a structured environment that a lot of people want, even if everybody doesn't want it, is a good thing, right? Versus explaining away why you are who you are. If you have to explain away your own identity, you don't have an identity. So I just think we like are coming out of this place on the messaging side where we've been trying to tell people all the ways in which we are similar to traditional district schools when that is not what makes us us. What makes us us is all the ways that we are different. So I think that's really important. The other thing, just to Chris's point, because it's been made a couple of times, I think it's really valid. So personal narratives are unassailable, right? I mean, they are. People like act well or poorly, in the legislative space in the face of them all the time. But what is sort of certain is that in the absence of them, you're going to lose. And what we have not done, and I think this is sort of like a phenotypal thing. So, charter school people, brainy people, like into facts, into systems, these kinds of things. And those folks, they're good across our movement, and the people who talk for us are brainy, people who like facts and aren't particularly good storytellers, and who for the most part aren't actually sending their kids to the schools, right? I mean, they've started the schools for all the right reasons, but messenger and audience matter deeply, as we were talking about earlier. And I just think that we have not decided procedurally that we really want to let the people who attend our schools talk for us, because it is easier to know that well, if Darrell goes there, he's not going to say the wrong thing, but I might not say the best thing either, that uncertainty is actually part of the electricity necessary to have a good messenger, to make a good message, and to win this sort of hearts and minds battle. So I absolutely agree that our parents and our kids actually in particular, they're probably even better than the parents. They're the people who should be fighting this on the front line. But except in a couple of lightning in a bottle cases, I don't think there's anything systematic about how we deploy them or their stories or their experiences for the betterment of all of us.
So one question I have is, we've talked a lot about some of the truths that we've had to revisit as advocates for this work, some of what is really broken, mistruths. Are we doing this well anywhere that you guys have seen? Are any of the stories that operators are putting out there, that the media has picked up on, resonating? Is it you guys are at local meetings, what have you seen that's moved the needle and actually made you believe that we can do this? Because one thing I'm hearing is it's not going to be a systematic deployment of how we talk to these audiences, because it is so highly contextual, and the audience in one California community is really different from the audience in another California community. But are there any universalities about these are the kernels, these are the types of tactics, these are the types of stories that are breaking through the noise? Because it's a high bar to break through the noise. So I'm wondering, in your travels, what you've heard and seen.
The easiest way for me to answer that question is I've been in school board meetings in different cities, and it's something I really love to do. Is when I go to a city, is go to the school board meeting. I think you learn a lot there, right? And I was a school board member, so I am a glutton for punishment. And I've seen kind of an attack mode that well-organized people come in with, and they're going after school board members, and they're trying to stop something on the agenda, and most of the time it's a reform, one reform or another. And they always, the one kind of monkey wrench that gets thrown into the whole game sometimes is that parent that stands up and she's got her little kids in tow, and she's speaking with the local register that makes sense to everybody, and she is not the person to be messed with, right? And it just throws a wrench in all those people that came with either red or green or blue t-shirts, who are all in the back of the room conspiring about how they're going to, eat children for a living. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Don't anybody tweet that. Right. Oh, yeah, there's that. So I actually believe that's very powerful. It's that one person who does that when I see that, and I've seen that in more than one place. I think that's really, really one of the most powerful things I'm going to say. One last thing, though, I'll switch from just that to say we better start thinking about how we deploy people and how we are preparing them to be their own foot soldiers. I use a military analogy that reform is often like the Air Force, flying over state capitals and dropping leaflets from the sky and just hoping that, like, you know, the message gets down there. And the unions and others are like the Army, just picking up the leaflets before the natives even get them, and like reading your mail and then going to them and saying, because they have foot troops. We talk about Massachusetts. They knocked on 1.5 million doors and lied at every single one of them, right? So we did an air war in Massachusetts. They did a ground game, and their ground game was just much better. That requires infrastructure, time, relationships, relationship building. You know, if your living was at stake, if your living was like, you know, like if I'm a teacher and I feel like you're really threatening me, my job during the day is to teach, and my job at night is to be crazy on Twitter, right? But if I'm a charter school parent, I don't even know that there's a fight going on. I don't even know that I'm at risk.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to, I had done some work in Nashville, and our public schools there, which was founded by Ravi Gupta, actually probably had one of the most effective kind of parent influence campaigns. Every school board meeting I ever went to, there was 36 charter school parents there from our public schools every single time. And Ravi was right there with them. And they made sure that people got out there. They took the time to make sure that they had rides and what they needed to do, but it had a huge influence. Now, you know, things have not always gone super favorably in terms of charters in Nashville, but they made sure that they defended every inch, and they had actual parents there with their kids often in tow, to make sure that their voices were heard. And that's something that I don't feel like charter schools in general do very effectively. That we kind of assume that that's too much to ask. And I think that there are plenty of parents that want to do that. So yeah, I mean, that there are people who are doing this. They are doing it well. We need to find those people. We need to model and figure out how they're doing it.
Yeah, I would just to jump on this. So I think a lot of the time we sort of underestimate the capital, personal, political, in terms of time, you know, and effort that a parent is willing to invest. And to the extent that you do that, you marginalize their ability to invest it. So this is one of the things I think Success Academy does really, really well. There is a dual mission. Everybody knows it. Educate kids at a high level, advocate at a high level. And the conditions around that are offered at the front end to everyone, right? So if you're a parent, you're enrolling your kid here, we're doing advocacy because, like, we care about our freedom, and we care about your kid, and we care about our ability to deliver that, and we can't do it without you, right? So that's not something, it's much harder to bake it in later. So I've been doing some work with Uncommon and Uncommon Schools and KIPP in Newark, and like they are building this culture. It's harder because they didn't do it in the beginning, right? They're like more fits and starts, but like, you know, they've taken it on, which in and of itself is like a really important thing. So if there's any advice I could say about that, it's be deliberate and intentional about it, and believe that your parents can actually participate in it at a high level because they can. That's the first thing. The second thing, just in terms of what is most effective, I think that like a parent who is testifying who is effective is not testifying about test scores. They're testifying about belief, right? About experience, about the intangibles, right? About the possibilities that are brought into existence because their kid is in the right school or in a school that's the right fit. And so I also think one of the things we have to guard against is over engineering the authenticity and feeling out of our potentially best messengers, who are our parents and kids. And then you come in, you wind up, you talk about the test scores, and we got, you know, this great model and this great 5-year plan. Like it's not real. So I would say that it is also important, like the best acting out on our behalf that our parents or our kids can do is their own authentic acting out, and we should prioritize and sort of support that, not try to engineer it away.
And I'm just going to jump in with a comment here about letting your parents act out in front of the media, because I think that a lot of charter schools across the country are sort of have their heads down and are like, we're just going to do our work and we're going to get great results, and are terrified of letting a reporter near their school, in their school, letting parents or teachers talk to reporters. It is so important to get good stories out there and to try to use those good stories to create amplification effects, whether it's on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, or working with local bloggers in many of these portfolio districts now. There are communication support systems tied into advocacy groups that can help you figure out what your message is and what your story is and getting it out there. And you roll the dice. Not every story is going to be great, and you have to run that risk. But I think more recently we've seen, charters in New York, charters in Los Angeles, like trying to get the word out there about what is it that's happening in our school, what makes this place special. We were talking earlier about how most people have never and will never be in a public charter school. They won't know what it looks and feels like. And so to the extent that the sector can help paint that picture, and it's happening live at meetings, but like we've got to use every place to do that, to have that conversation.
The one thing I was going to add is just that when those inaccurate stories or depictions of charter schools happen in like the mainstream media, like making sure that you're correcting the record. I mean, I think a lot of people often are like, it's not worth us digging into this or formally writing a letter or calling the editor or calling the journalists and sitting down and having a meeting with them. I think it actually is really effective, because unless you say something, I mean, whether, consciously or unconsciously, the way the reporter is going to come back the next time there's a charter story that someone wants to tell, that they will think about the fact that, wait, I might have not gotten this right the first time. I need to talk to other people. I mean, there's been a number of situations in New Orleans where obviously there are all charter schools, or almost all charter schools there, where there were stories that were very clear, because the other side is calling with stories to tell. And all of a sudden you're getting calls about random people, or somebody who you fired a few years ago who now is making accusations or something like that. Being proactive, calling up journalists, telling them, people who are writing stories and saying, let me give you my side of the story. That's never going to hurt you. Hoping that the story doesn't run, or hoping that many people don't read it, is not the way to respond.
To Peter's point, for the haters, the world is filled with all of your ex-boyfriends and girlfriends, and they got them on speed dial. Right? What do you think about this person? And you're approaching it like, oh, I'm in a good relationship. Things are going to be okay. But this point about like, I am proactively trying to muddy the water. Right? I am in the sort of process all the time of figuring out ways to make your life more difficult. Like, you have to understand that there are people sort of like maniacally and methodically organized around making your life more difficult than it needs to be.
So I'll add one piece to this, which is, I want to add a point of realism to this too. Different charter schools are positioned differently, and they have different levels of resources. And at the end of the day, my message to you, and in every forum where we talk about education, is that achievement and results are what matters, right? So what I need people to do is actually run good schools and actually educate children, and that is a very hard job. If it wasn't so hard, everybody would be doing it. So this additional thing of you being really great organizers and great communicators and great kind of media people, and having someone on staff who does that, and being organizers, really good, authentic organizing and whatnot, that would be all great if it wasn't so damn hard just to get kids to actually meet the state standards on all the things that we know will put them forward, right? So we have to put that as a point of realism. You need help, right? You need kind of collaboratives, you need partners. And a lot of people who run schools get very parochial just about what they're running. And I'm not asking for people to step out and be the perfect organizer, perfect media person and all of that, but you guys should be banding together and not so parochial just about your school to share resources on doing exactly that. working with activist community members. How can you develop surrogates? Who will be your surrogate bench? You all, if you have 5 schools, you might have a couple of thousand students and parents amongst you. Out of that couple of thousand, there has to be 5 surrogates, right? There has to be 5 really kind of good. And you might be the one to give them technical assistance and to build them up and to help them. But in your local activist community or advocacy community, somebody does have the resources to make that happen. But I just wanted to put in a plug. I don't ever think there should be any education discussion anywhere in the United States that at some point someone doesn't say student achievement is important, and it's the main thing. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Maybe the last thing I add on this, and I should have started this by saying thank you for all that you do. I mean, like I'm sure your families thank you all the time, but it's great to be able to talk to you about what you're doing. But the other thing I would say, this I think is kind of like this is a movement discussion, and it is partly about NCLB, ESSA, and partly about like charter regulation and like the future of charters and what we do or don't want to do with them. But I do think that part of why part of the challenge has been that the chutes that we sent people through to make schools had a bias toward one kind of school and one kind of leader who was like a highly educated Teach America alum who also happened to be white. All right, this is my boy, Peter Cunningham's my boy, but he's my boy. And so regardless of how great the schools were in talking about countering these narratives, right, real or imagined, somebody put out there that, oh, none of your school leaders look like me, and now everybody's like, oh, none of your school leaders look like me, and this is a big deal, right? So whatever it takes to, bring enough different kinds of schools into the world that we can build a bigger base, I think that's really important, right? That's about the philosophy of chartering, it's about authorizing, it's about all that other stuff. And 2, whatever you can do to make sure that in doing that, the chute doesn't have a bias towards sort of like one kind of leader. I think we got to be serious and intentional about that, because like Chantel Wright, who runs Achievement Prep in DC, who is a recovering corporate lawyer who's black, who like was like, I'm not changing the world enough, who started the school, and it's a kick-ass school, like there's no reason why we can't be getting more, recovering lawyers of color to start charter schools. The challenge though is that like we don't, systemically, I don't think we've sort of valued that. Or the features of that individual in a way that would put that person in a position of leadership, and hence in a position of spokesmanship and advocacy.
So before we turn it over to questions, which I want to leave plenty of time for, I've got to ask about the current political climate, and we're living in this weird world of alternative facts, which makes countering misleading narratives even more complicated. Do charters need to pick a side? I mean, I look at what's going on in Los Angeles. We've all seen the flyers trying to, associate certain school board candidates with a federal school choice agenda, making, false claims about people's political viewpoints, trying to say, oh, she's with Trump, he's with Trump. The charter sector was already on defense, and now things have just become a lot more complicated. So I want to ask you guys how operators and school leaders should be thinking about that, and what they should or shouldn't be messaging to their communities. Does it change anything, or doesn't it?
I think, first of all, it's always bad for charter schools to pick sides, right? The Ed Reform Coalition, the charter, quote-unquote, movement has always been a bipartisan movement. We have benefited from that. We need to retain it. And that means that folks that are on the more left-hand side have to, make sure that it doesn't become all, Republican or anti-Trump or whatever. And I think on the Republican side, it has to be like, let's not take this to a crazy extreme. I think the best thing that the charter schools can do is show that they're being advocates for their kids and their families, right? You don't have to pick sides. You have to show that you are defending the rights and the things that are valuable to your families, that are helping them get to school, that are helping them get health care, that are helping them do things. And that is where you are going to make impressions in communities. I mean, they can call you, the Betsy DeVos of Fresno or Los Angeles or wherever, but the fact of the matter is that you need to show that, at the end of the day, that kind of debate is not going to move you off of your focus on what you're doing for kids and their families every day.
I think if you have been in education reform for any amount of time, you've been living in alternative facts already. You should have a black belt in it already, right? You should have like a total black belt in alternative facts and kind of non-truths. Second, I'm not part of any movement. I'm not part of the charter school movement or ed reform movement. I'm part of the Chris has 5 kids and needs to get them educated movement. I'm part of there's 8 million black children who are having their minds diminished by public schools movement. That's the movement that I'm in. That exists the day before we had an election. It's going to exist the day after we have the next election. It's going to continue into the future. So that doesn't change. My goals, my values, my hopes, my dreams haven't changed. Associating people with other people is, yes, it's going to be a cheap tactic that people are going to use right now. And a lot of people are going to be on defense. I step right out of it. It doesn't make any sense to me. The facts are still the facts. The point of what we're doing is still the point of what we're doing. And you have to keep the main thing strategy for all time. And the strategy right now is the same. Now, what I will say about this is it's going to be political kind of testy for you if your student body, for instance, have real hopes and fears and concerns about sending their kids to school because they might get picked up by ICE at the bus stop, right? And that's very real. So localized viewing of your situation is very important because it's going to be different in Los Angeles and it's going to be where I live in Minnesota versus where Pete lives in New Orleans. So you have to know your location. I will say this about communication. It's just about message, messenger, and audience. Those are just the 3 things that you have to concentrate on. And sometimes you're not the messenger. I don't even care if you have the great message. And you have to know what your audience is, and you have to lift up their hopes and dreams as your strategy. Your strategy has to be very much about your audience. So that's all I'll add to that. It is going to be a tactic, though. You are going to be associated. It's going to be like you're wearing a Betsy DeVos T-shirt every day to work, right? And you have to decide what T-shirt you want to wear. You get to pick which T-shirt you want to wear.
I just want to support and kind of echo everything that's been said here. This is all right. We benefit from the bipartisan machinations of lots of people who were doing things a long time before President Obama got elected and decided he liked charter schools. So I think it's important to understand that. I think to Chris's point, my beliefs were the same on this day last year as they are this year, right? So they predate the current situation in DC, and they will continue beyond the current situation in DC. And I think that's always a really important thing to remember too. The last thing I would say though is that what I do think we have to do is be a little self-interested and learn from the opposition. So, for instance, when teacher evaluations getting rolled out sort of systematically across the country, along with Common Core, and the Tea Party decided it hated Common Core, who was right there with the Tea Party? The teachers union, right? When they saw an intersection of their interests and an intersection of folks that I would hazard to say that most folks in this room would not count themselves among the Tea Party, they were right up in there, high-fiving and taking out somebody who was problematic for them, right? So I think we ascribe much higher ideals and intent to the political apparatus and machinations of our biggest challenge, meaning the NEA and the AFT, whatever, while they ascribe none of those high-minded ideals to themselves. They are not bound by any of those ideals. So I'm not saying that we need to, this guy used to work for me all the time. He'd say, never wrestle with a pig because you both get dirty and the pig enjoys it. I'm not saying we need to do that. Right? What I am saying is that in the political space, it is necessary to hold the sort of dissonance of fighting for what you believe in and acting on opportunity at the same time. right? And that is an important lesson, and I think over the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to be really important for us to take that one seriously.
Yeah, I just want to jump on top of this because this is actually one of the things that I think that charter supporters and the reform community in general does a really bad job of. The other side, like you said, they will do what they need to do in order to win. And they are being hypocrites all the time. When the teachers union is fighting the expansion of school breakfasts in Los Angeles like they were a few years ago, we should have been jumping up and down about that. You know, when, I forget where it was, it might in the past year or so, somebody went to a co-located charter in Southern California somewhere, left all these nasty signs on the fence of the school that the kids saw that we don't want you here, et cetera, that was all put on by the teachers unions. That was just local news. We didn't make a big deal about that. When, you know, Lily Garcia and Randy Weingarten are calling everybody in this room plutocrats who are trying to profit off of kids, we don't point out that actually you're making $500,000. You're part of the 1%. You know, we are not calling them out for the idea, for just being hypocrites. You know, we get abused, but we don't give it right back to them. And I feel like, you know, if it's not you running a school, we need to have people who are doing that on your behalf. Because, I mean, the fact of the matter is, I think that, you know, most of us are actually trying to do the right thing for kids, and it's all politics for the other side. And they will do whatever they need to do. And when they cross lines, we should be calling them out for it and bringing attention to it. Why is that not national news that, you know, they're trying to block school breakfast for poor kids in Los Angeles, right? If it was charter people doing it, it would be the end of the world. So we just need to make sure that we're pointing these things out and not afraid to say that. Because the other side, they are shooting to kill. They are not, you know, some people are accommodationists that are saying, oh, like, you know, we can find a middle ground with them. They are not, they are trying to run the table. And we have tried that, and that is not going to work.
I want to open it up for questions. Maybe.
Darrell and Pete, to your point, we've been told for so long that the conventional wisdom is that you cannot fight back against a teachers union per se because they are seen as teachers. I would like to get your thoughts on that conventional wisdom, because the last 2 points you guys just made were very much take them on hard, find your wartime conciliary and go. And I'd like to know where you've seen it done effectively, if you advocate calling out bad actors for being bad actors, and where we might, because there's nothing new under the sun. Where has this been done well that we can now replicate here?
Is that, did you just drop, is that Ecclesiastes or Paul's letter to the Corinthians? I just, you know, background knowledge. So I just two things about this. One, I can see, not doing it has gotten us here, which I think is really, really important. And so the question is, like, either we're going to keep doing what we're doing, which is like not trying to take this on, or we're going to try to take it on and kind of see what happens. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would just say is that the people best positioned to do that are actually teachers who teach in charter schools, right? So this has got to be like, you know, teacher on teacher crime or something like that. I don't know. Like, you got to like array the people at similar levels of experience against this, because like I can talk about the sort of liberation inherent in being a teacher in a school that is the right match for you. I mean, I don't think we spend enough time talking about how like chartering and teachers are actually a match, just like chartering and kids are a match. It's like an important beneficial dimension that's like left out of the discussion. But you know, they, I think, are the people who are best deployed best positioned to confront what other teachers say about what we do or what we don't do. Now, I actually don't think I know any place that is doing that systematically and well in a way that's like directed, because like you can have everybody talk and nobody on message, right? But I'm not going to say it's easy, but I think this is the kind of thing where, you know, you start a fellowship in your network and you say, who are 8 teachers who want to be really engaged in this sort of like talking about what we do, and you support them and you man the press battery for them and you get them out there, but it's not going to do it on its own.
So I haven't seen a place where it's been great, where there's been a great example. But I do think even in the breakfast case that Pete brought up, it was SEIU that actually pushed back on the teachers union. And I think a lot of people missed an opportunity to join with SEIU because they have a more working class union. And that could have been a time where a lot of people could have come to that, because that was just such a clear winner of an issue. In Minnesota, we also had something called the Contract for Student Achievement. It was a contract, it was a small campaign that was meant to get normal people from the civilians into the room when teachers are negotiating their contract. And it had never been done before. And in fact, they didn't even know that we had the right to be there by law. And it was just a great strategy, because once people started seeing what was actually said in those rooms, it kind of blew a lot of people's minds. So bringing pastors and other folks into the negotiating room and whatever. LA years ago also had a similar campaign that we looked at that made us start ours, and it was Don't Hold Us Back campaign, and it was like through class and the United Way, and I think they had like 30, the Urban League and others. Not perfect examples, but these are examples that have a glimmer of hope of what you can do to have a very time-limited issue. Get on an issue that's time-limited, that is going to be hot. I want to say something that I think is a little bit different than the teachers are the right ones to say this. I want us all to make this agreement. Let's just make an agreement that no matter who the target is, we are always going to speak out when kids are being hurt. And I don't care if it's the teachers union, I don't care who it is, right? We just need to make a deal with ourselves that even if there's no political advantage or tactical advantage, if children are being hurt, we are going to say something. I just want you all to know, if it's in one of your schools, I'm going to say it about you too, right? Like, so let's just make this deal that we're going to say it no matter who it is, where it is, or whatever. Because when someone says to me, like I said this at a debate earlier this week, when I read the headline that Los Angeles Unified District has paid out $300 million in sex abuse cases, I don't care who my opponent is going to be on that. I'm going to say something about that, and so should all of you. When I read that the entire state of Texas, all of their school board members have been counseled on how not to provide special education services, I'm going to say something about that. I don't care who is on the other side of that issue. That's an entire state, one of the largest states in the country, one of the largest school districts I just mentioned. But we are so trained as people on this side of the fence that we can't say anything bad about the traditional districts. We don't want to poke that bear. We don't need that type of trouble in our lives. No. If we are really about what we're saying we're about, I want us to make a deal. We're going to say it, whether it's the teachers union, and boy, are they the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to bad things for kids, right? So I need us to lose this idea that there's somehow this untouchable entity that we can't push back on. We better be pushing back if it's actually hurting kids, if we actually believe what they're pushing is hurting kids.
The one thing I'll add, and I don't really have any good examples of this, but it's just very clear to me right now that the new kind of slogan when, charter opponents are coming after charter schools is about taking money away from the traditional districts. That's what they did in Massachusetts, for example. Right? Everybody is all about charter schools and all about giving kids opportunity in theory, but then when it's turned into an issue of, but it's going to take money away from your schools, even when it won't, even when that's not factual, all of a sudden people are no longer fans. If you want to lose your faith in like democratic school board governments, look at a line item budget from your school district. You will find so much, and I've looked at many district budgets, things that make no sense, money that is wasted, contracts that we've had for 10 years because someone's cousin had a software program that they sold us that didn't do anything. I was working in a district in Louisiana and discovered that we had dozens of stenographers in the central office. I had to explain to my young colleague who was in her early 20s what a stenographer was, because in the 21st century, being able to type is kind of like an implied skill, you know. So I feel like that is always a good defense, right? When people are saying that charter schools are stealing money from our traditional schools, from where you send your kids to school, go and show them that the district is throwing money away that they should be spending in classrooms on kids. Because really, districts shouldn't be set up in such a way where it is when, you know, some kids, a small percentage of kids leave, that they cannot sustain themselves financially. Then why are we paying out huge, you know, lawsuit fines that over years and years? Why are we doing all this? Why do we have a transportation, you know, contract that makes 0 sense? Digging into things like that and showing like, no, you think that the system works? The system doesn't work, right? That, I think, is a really good way to kind of counter some of those, you know, attacks which are going to come.
Well, I will just say this one thing on the heels of what Peter said. Peter Cunningham says you need to smile on Twitter, by the way. He says, I know how to do it, but you don't. It is also possible that it is not broken at all and it is working exactly as it is supposed to, right? So I do think one of the things we need to think about is like the waste, the graft, the terrible results if you're not from a household with 2 white college educated parents, the college accounts that get filled, the pension accounts that get done, like all of those things they work really well. They work so well, it is like they were engineered to work well, but the education part wasn't. So I do think that it is, you know, you gotta take some skepticism you gotta take the skepticism stick to this one, because complex systems give you what they are designed to give you. You would not design a system that was meant to eradicate achievement gaps, empower teachers, bring innovators into the fold, and ultimately make people free the way that you design urban district, like America's urban district schools. So it's just an important consideration, no matter what you're talking about, but especially if you're trying to sort of like fracture an injustice that's just like hardwired, like a system that has injustice hardwired into it.
Let me give you a couple of examples. I've been working on school choice for a long time now, but last 6 years I've worked not only on charters but also on private school choice and in a lot of red states, and I think I have seen some examples of where you made some progress against breaking the identity between teachers and teacher unions. And I think the first one I would point to is Florida, where there has been a conscious effort to show that the teachers unions' positions on school choice are antithetical to good education. And I think the teachers union is not giving up. I mean, they're in court. They're trying to kill the tax credit scholarship in Florida. They're going to try to counter everything that you do. But I think if you look at the public opinion polls that have come out over the past few years, you're starting to see that break in Florida of where charter schools, where private school choice programs have consistently put families out there. They've consistently talked about how this is about freedom. This is about choosing what works for you, and that in fact any school can be a failed school for any particular child. Yeah. So I think the other one, the other one I'd point to is New York, where there's also been an alliance made with other unions. So I would say that we need to be much more aggressive in California in looking at other unions, and I think trying to build alliances with unions like the building trades.
And is your question about where the opportunities
Where
are
are the
there?
opportunities that you see in California to really do that and be much more aggressive about that?
So just a quick answer to me is SEIU. And I have a long-standing kind of relationship with like saying that about SEIU. When I ran, I ran in a very liberal city as an evangelical libertarian type guy, and this is a kale-eating city. And the one labor group that actually endorsed me, ran my floor campaign, ran my convention stuff was SEIU. And boy, did they kick butt in doing it. And I think part of that was they were the working class union of all of them. They weren't the middle class people driving into Minneapolis from other places to do their job during the day and then drive home and vote at home. They were actually the food service workers, the bus drivers, the janitors, the folks who actually lived and had kids in those schools. And I loved that. So I would say SEIU is one very clear example of a good opportunity.
I just say that one other thing that we don't do a very effective job is exploiting divisions between teachers and the unions. If you look at the WikiLeaks emails, and Mike and Antonucci brought this up, and I was kind of surprising this is not national news about how NEA's kind of endorsement process was pretty much pre-scripted. Even though it's supposed to be a democratic organization. I'm sure there are a lot of Bernie bros and gals out there who, that would really who are members of NEA and AFT who would be pretty upset about that. We did not bring attention to that. And there's a lot of things like that we should be pointing out, saying, why are you, what teachers in Los Angeles are paying $1,000 a year? Why aren't we looking at how that money is being spent? Because there is a record of how it's spent. They have to submit it to the Department of Labor. And saying like, why are they spending all this money on all these different things that have no connection on whether you feel you are supported in your school, whether you have the resources that you need for your students, and on your working conditions. And we don't do a very good job at that, and I just feel like that's a missed opportunity.
Can I go? Yeah. So I actually have two questions. Choose which one you want to answer. So I love the message about be courageous. Fight forward. I want to bring up the issue of retribution because you can talk to most of the CMO leaders in Los Angeles today, and they will tell you that they know they're going to be obliterated if Steve Zimmer gets reelected. Yet, because of fear of what's going to happen if they're too far forward, the retribution to their school and therefore their students chills them. They're not willing to take a step out. So one question is, what do you say to the leaders of our schools who have a lot at risk if they do what you're suggesting? Number one. And number two, if you prefer this question, how do you handle in California the attempts by the NEA and AFT to conflate charter schools and private school choice?
Both are good questions.
So I'm going to leave private school choice on the table for Darrell. I will just quickly say I'm absolutely for choice. I'm for my choice. Each of my kids, apparently to the government, is worth about 12 grand. Give me the 12 grand for each of them and let me do what I got to do. Right? So, but the rest of that, he will answer. The thing about Los Angeles, this is what I said earlier, though, about building surrogates instead of being the one that gets out there. There are very real material consequences to being a school leader who wants to jump out there on a lot of things. Like real, the consequences are real, which is why I think there's a much bigger market for surrogates and for other people. I think Green Dot does a pretty good job of organizing its parents and letting its parents get out front. We have some charter leaders that want to jump in front of every bullet and jump out there and be the person, who comes out and does the big thing and whatnot, and they're absolutely the wrong person to do it, and it does put a mark on their back. I mean, we just had some good schools that quite possibly could have lost their authorization in Los Angeles, and they are living in a real world where that's possible even if you're doing a good job. And meanwhile, I just want to be very clear, Miramonte with the 20-year sex abuse case is still open, right, and is never facing that exact same thing. That's the political reality, the difference between being a CMO leader who wants to stay alive and a district school. But I do think you get around that by building up surrogate benches, by building up other people to do the bidding, and not being the person that has to jump out in front of the bullet and the camera every time. Because I just don't, I actually think that there's frustration that school leaders aren't doing that more. I'm not a person that has that frustration. I actually understand the kind of the material reality to doing that. You better be careful. And LA is a great example of a place where you better be careful. So.
The next step in this is that often they have a surrogate, CCSA plays that surrogate role.
Yeah.
And then they're critical of CCSA if they do things like bring up sex scandals, because
Yeah.
that's both going too far.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think CCSA is like the surrogate I'm thinking of, actually, right? Like, I'm thinking about people that have social capital and social standing and will present social proof within the communities that they're actually activating. And that's not to say that CCSA isn't that. I'm not like, more power to y'all. I don't know enough about y'all to know. But that's actually, I'm really thinking of something more in the roots. When I say surrogates, I'm thinking of the people that have unimpeachable kind of social standing within their communities, or you're not going to beat them up as being some sort of like foreign entity, because that's what we get saddled with all the time. Like you're AstroTurf, or you're like just some sort of mouthpiece for the rich and all that. The real surrogates and good surrogates are ones that will sidestep that completely. That will not even be able. You won't be able to say that about them.
Yeah, I would also add that. Raising the sex scandal isn't too far. The sex scandal is too far, but maybe that's just me. Yeah, to both of your questions. The first one's shorter, and I think Chris kind of raised this too, Jim. Is leading is an act of division, right? When you lead, you change the world. And it's not always easy to do that, right? And it has consequences, just like change has consequences. So I think Chris's strategy is around surrogates is a good one. At the same time, I would just say, collaboration means they kill you last. And if you're not out there fighting for it, somebody's going to take it from you, right? So that, and like New York, I think has been a great example of this. Like Mayor Bloomberg got a third term, so everybody kind of got like 4 extra years of and nobody was really prepared for, a mayor who ran and said he was going to take you out and then tried to take you out. People are like, how does this work? What do we do? So the financial and advocacy climate there is obviously one that people were available to fight and fight quickly. But the advances that we're making right now in charter policy in New York are not because we have shrinking violence. It's because we have fighters. So I just think that matters. Like you want to grow, you want to survive, you got to fight. It just is what it is, and fighting is imperfect. That's the first thing. The second thing is, so I'm in case you had not gleaned this, I'm a very strong supporter of charter schools. I'm also a very strong supporter of private school choice because I went to private school. And the whether or not you like private school choice as a thing in the universe, from a political standpoint, charter schools in America aren't everywhere enough and don't have enough people to be like a hugely rational constituency on their own. With private schools, they do, right? So like take, New York, for instance. We got a lot of charter schools in New York City. We got a couple up in Buffalo, and then we got the great in the middle, right? What's in the great in the middle? A lot of private schools, right? With lots of people of varying incomes, in lots of different professions and lots of different zip codes, some of them with college degrees, some of them not, right? Like that, the sort of mix of private school constituency, the demography of it, is actually what charter schools need, right? Like, I understand California is kind of an outlier in terms of how many schools it has and where they are, but like generally, you get to scale faster as a political force if you partner than if you say, like, you're the bear in the Far Side cartoon and you're like, shoot that bear, you know? So I do think that this is, again, like, this is an ideology thing. This is a political thing. Like, your job is to make the tent bigger so you can make your movement bigger. Like, you should think about whether or not you can roll your dice with private school people in a way that is meaningful for both of you. My 2 cents.
Now, this is a comment. In terms of Jeff Bell, Contra Costa County, I'm the vice chair of the county board, and we have 21 charters. And we've had our concerns. Nevertheless, we found 3 things that tend to work in terms of to keep the CTA and other groups at bay, and it's working greatly. Number 1, we have a strong political alliance, not just in terms of with the Charter School Association, but with private schools, and also with the trade association, believe it or not, the trade groups. And so the trade groups and CTA tend to try to stick together, but I've found a way to divide them. So, and they tend to go with us. And then in addition to that, we tend to put those schools, we have 19 school districts that we oversee in our county, and the main districts that are causing the problem, what we tend to do is to look at, to keep them on the defense, not on offense. We file, well, not we, but I work with community group leaders to file OC. Not me, no. Actually, I have an advisory council. I have a 16-member advisory group attorneys and such. But what we actually do, my team does, is that we actually we file OCRs and such. So we keep them on the defense. You can't let them take an offensive strategy, and it takes having a strong political. And then, like for example, yesterday, I had 9 members of my team at the Capitol working on new legislation. You know, working with the members of the legislature, so building that, strengthening that legislative capital. So, and finally, we have a strong parent and community buy-in. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's about the student, it's about the parent. So we look at it from a legal perspective, then political perspective, and parent engagement perspective. And that's what we use, and guess what? It works in Contra Costa County.
Hey, 1 sec. We're over in a few minutes, formal, but as long as anybody wants to hang out and pester these guys until they go running.
Pete Cook will be drawing a map. And check out the 74.org if you want to read the essays that the panelists have written on this topic, and for other news. And thank you to a great audience. It was really a privilege to be here with you today.